Jeremy moved slowly around his bedroom, fluffing his pillows and savoring the rare luxury of getting into bed early in the evening. With a snowstorm fast approaching, the old man was content to hunker down and sleep through it all, safe and warm. Just as he was about to settle into his freshly made bed, the doorbell rang, startling him. "Who could be at this hour?" he grumbled, shuffling downstairs. Opening the door, he found his young neighbor, her face pale and anxious. "Mr. Rogers, there's a dog in your backyard." "It must be freezing," the sweet girl said, her voice tinged with urgency. Jeremy thanked her and went to check on the dog. But as he drew closer, his steps faltered and his face went pale. There was something chilling hidden underneath the dog's belly. Jeremy had spent his entire life in the quiet town of Berkshire, a place that held all his memories. He was born and raised here, met and married his beautiful wife Helen, and together they shared 35 years in this very house, building a life that once felt unbreakable. But that chapter had ended long ago. With Helen gone for over a decade, Jeremy had become accustomed to the solitude, filling his days with routine and chores, the quiet hum of the clock his only company. At 75, he was still determinedly independent, stubbornly mowing his own lawn and keeping the house in order, though the weight of loneliness lingered in every corner. Winter, however, was different. The cold gnawed at his old bones, every gust of harsh wind a reminder of his frailty. With a snowstorm looming, as warned by the local authorities, Jeremy hurried through his chores, eager to retreat to the sanctuary of his bed, away from the creeping chill and the loneliness that always felt harsh in the cold. Jeremy was just about to settle into bed when the doorbell rang, cutting through the evening quiet. He sighed, feeling the ache in his joints as he shuffled to the door. Standing there was the little girl from next door, her breath misting in the frigid air. "Mr. Rogers, there's a dog in your backyard," she said, her voice edged with worry. "It's been there since morning, and I'm afraid it's going to freeze." Jeremy blinked. A dog? In his yard? He hadn't heard a single sound all day, but the girl's fear was unmistakable. Jeremy, though bewildered, nodded and thanked her. He shut the door, the chill lingering in his bones as he braced himself for the cold. Layering on his thickest coat, scarf, and gloves, he prepared for the onslaught of frigid air. The cold hit him like a punch, the wind clawing through his layers and seeping into his joints. Every step was an effort, his breath puffing out in misty bursts as he trudged toward the backyard. As Jeremy neared the yard, he spotted the dog, curled in a tight ball near the fence. Its fur was matted and dirty, barely distinguishable from the snowy ground. He moved closer, his heart quickening with a mix of concern and caution. The dog was unmoving. One could mistake it for dead if it wasn't for the strange sounds coming from him. But as he extended a hand, the dog's head snapped up, eyes wild. A deep, menacing growl rumbled from the dog, its teeth bared in a snarl that froze Jeremy in place. The hostility in the animal's eyes was unmistakable, a fierce, unyielding gaze that sent a shiver down his spine. Jeremy's pulse quickened, a sharp reminder of how vulnerable he was in that moment. He couldn't take the chance of getting hurt. Jeremy took a step back, heart hammering, feeling the sharp bite of fear. Jeremy hesitated, the instinct to help clashing with the clear and present danger. He turned and made his way back inside, breath unsteady. Jeremy closed the door behind him and leaned against it, his mind racing. He couldn't just leave the dog out there in the freezing cold, but the threat of a bite or worse loomed large in his thoughts. If he got hurt, who would be there to help him? He was alone, with no one to care for him if things went wrong. The prospect of a bad fall or a serious bite was more than just painful. It could be catastrophic. He stared out the window, watching as the first flakes of snow began to fall, light at first, but with a steady, deliberate pace. The sight made his heart sink. He knew the storm would only get worse, and the dog wouldn't stand a chance in the bitter cold. The thought of it freezing to death gnawed at him, tightening the knot of anxiety in his chest. He couldn't just let it happen. Determined not to let fear rule him, Jeremy suited up again, pulling on extra layers. Another sweater, a thicker scarf, and even a pair of old gardening gloves in hopes they might offer some protection. He felt bulky and stiff, unsure of the outcome of this battle, but he couldn't sit by and do nothing. Jeremy stepped outside, once more, the cold stinging his face as he made his way to the backyard. This time, he moved slowly, cautiously, keeping his distance. The dog was still there, its body curled protectively. As he drew closer, Jeremy noticed the dog's posture was less aggressive and more defensive. The growl from earlier seemed to have shifted to a low whine, a sound that hinted at something other than outright hostility. It wasn't trying to threaten him. It was guarding something. His pulse quickened with curiosity. What could it be hiding? Jeremy took a deep breath and inched closer, speaking softly to calm the dog. "Easy there. I'm not here to hurt you," he murmured, his voice gentle but firm. The dog's eyes tracked his every move, but it didn't growl this time. Instead, it shifted slightly, revealing something hidden beneath its belly. Jeremy's heart pounded as he heard faint, strange sounds, soft, muffled noises that were unfamiliar and unsettling. The strange sound sent a ripple of dread through him. Jeremy's first thought about the mystery of the hidden creatures was kitten sounds. Jeremy took a step back. He was allergic to cats, and touching them would trigger his severe allergies. Jeremy hurried back inside, his breath shaky, as he fumbled for his laptop. He typed in a frantic search, "How to take care of kittens if you're allergic to them." He clicked on the first video that popped up trying to find a solution to this strange predicament. But as the video played, Jeremy's eyes drifted back to the dog outside, the muffled sounds playing in his mind. Then it hit him, the sounds didn't match. They were not the high-pitched whines of kittens at all. There was something different about them, something that didn't quite fit. His momentary relief was soon replaced with an uneasy fear. What was the dog really hiding? The snow outside thickened, and Jeremy felt the weight of urgency pressing down on him once more. Whatever was out there, he needed to save it before the storm hit. Jeremy sat by the window, the snowfall thickening into a steady white curtain outside. He felt a gnawing sense of helplessness, the urgency of the situation weighing heavily on him. Unsure of his next move, he reached for his phone and called the local animal shelter. The woman on the other end listened patiently, but sighed with regret. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rogers," she said, her voice apologetic. "With the storm rolling in, our rescue team can't make it out until it clears. It's just too dangerous right now." Jeremy thanked her, his heart sinking as he hung up. The snow was falling faster, thicker, and the cold was biting through every crack and crevice of his old house. He glanced outside at the dog, still hunched over its hidden treasure. There was no time to waste. The storm would only get worse, and the dog, along with whatever it was protecting, wouldn't last the night in such brutal conditions. The thought of them freezing out there unsettled him deeply. Jeremy knew he couldn't sit idly by. He bundled up once more, his determination outweighing the fear. He trudged through the snow to his backyard shed, the wind whipping at his face as he rummaged through his tools and supplies. He needed something, anything, that might lure the dog away without provoking it. Crazy ideas swirled in his mind as he scanned the cluttered shelves. His eyes then fell on an old squeaky toy that belonged to a neighbor's dog years ago. He briefly considered throwing it to distract the dog, thinking it might stir some curiosity or playfulness. But the toy was brittle with age, and he feared the dog might see it as a threat or even ignore it completely. Another half-baked plan formed as he stared at a coiled garden hose. What if he sprayed the ground near the dog to drive it back? But the idea of turning water into icy patches made him quickly reconsider. The last thing he needed was to create a slippery hazard in the freezing cold. Jeremy felt the frustration mounting. Each idea seemed to fall short, either impractical or potentially harmful. The snow was coming down harder now, swirling in fierce gusts that stung his skin. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and steadied himself against the rising tide of panic. There had to be a way to do this. Jeremy stared out the window, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew he needed a different approach. He looked at the dog again, studying its matted fur and thin body. The dog looked frail and weak, shivering uncontrollably in the brutal cold. An idea flickered in his mind. Maybe he could lure the dog with food. Jeremy hurried inside, heading straight for the freezer. He grabbed a bag of sausages, hoping the enticing smell might coax the dog away. Wrapping his hand in a thick blanket to shield himself from potential bites, he moved swiftly to the kitchen, his resolve hardening with each step. He ignited the grill, the sausages sizzling as they hit the hot surface. The savory aroma quickly filled the air, warming the room and Jeremy's spirits. He carefully plated the sausages and stepped into the frigid night, braving the elements with renewed determination. As Jeremy approached the dog, he moved with deliberate slowness, mindful not to spook it. He placed a sausage within the dog's reach, the warm scent wafting between them. The dog's nose twitched, catching the smell, but it remained in place, eyes still locked on whatever lay beneath it. Undeterred, Jeremy continued to lay a trail of sausages, each piece leading gradually toward the shed. He moved methodically, his breath misting in the air, setting down one sausage after another until he reached the shed's entrance. Then he retreated, heart-pounding, to watch from the safety of his home. Peering through the window, Jeremy's anxiety peaked as he observed the dog. It hadn't moved, still hunched protectively over its hidden cargo. Doubt gnawed at him. Had he failed again? The minutes stretched, each one feeling like an eternity as the snow swirled more furiously around them. But then a small movement caught Jeremy's eye. The dog's head lifted slightly, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air, the scent of the sausages finally reaching it. Slowly, cautiously, it inched forward, driven by hunger. It grabbed the first sausage, chewing eagerly, then paused, assessing the situation. Bit by bit, the dog followed the trail, its movements careful and deliberate. Jeremy watched with bated breath, feeling a mix of relief and tension as the dog ate each piece of sausage. The animal seemed to grow bolder with each bite, the lure of food overpowering its initial caution. Finally, the dog reached the shed's threshold. It worked. The dog, driven by hunger, had moved away from the spot it had so fiercely guarded. Jeremy exhaled, a small but profound relief washing over him as he saw the dog reach for the plate of sausages sitting in the shed. As the dog reached the plate of sausages inside the shed, Jeremy moved quickly, shutting the door behind it to shield the animal from the relentless snowfall. He paused for a moment, his heart still racing, before turning his attention to what the dog had been so fiercely guarding. Jeremy approached the spot with trepidation, the snow crunching underfoot as he neared. The faint, strange sounds were still audible, muffled and almost haunting in the silence of the storm. His mind raced, each step bringing him closer to the answer. He knelt down, his breath catching as he carefully brushed off the thin layer of snow that covered the creatures. To his astonishment, the creature behind the strange noises that had scared Jeremy earlier was not a kitten. Instead, it was two tiny owlets, their downy feathers fluffed against the cold. They peered up at him with wide, unblinking eyes, their small, round bodies trembling slightly. Jeremy's heart swelled with both relief and wonder. Gently, Jeremy scooped the owlets into a warm blanket, cradling them against his chest. He hurried inside, mindful of their delicate state, and set them down in a cozy box near the fireplace where the warmth would help revive them. His thoughts quickly returned to the poor dog. Jeremy returned to the shed, his breath fogging in the bitter cold. The dog lay slumped on the floor, eyes half closed and body still, its earlier resolve now replaced with utter exhaustion. Jeremy's pulse quickened. The dog had clearly given everything it had to protect the owlets, and now it lay on the brink of collapse. He knelt beside the dog, his hands trembling as he gently checked for signs of life. The dog's breathing was shallow, its body weak and unresponsive. The bitter cold and relentless strain had taken their toll. Jeremy's heart ached as he realized the dog's condition was dire. It had sacrificed so much to keep the owlets safe. Panic threatened to overtake Jeremy as he stroked the dog's matted fur. He couldn't bear the thought of losing the dog now, not after everything it had done. Jeremy carefully lifted the dog, cradling its frail form in his arms, and carried it inside, hoping the warmth of his home would be enough to save it. Jeremy gently laid the dog near the fireplace, wrapping it tightly in a thick blanket. The warmth of the fire filled the room, but it seemed to do little for the dog, whose breathing remained labored and shallow. Jeremy watched helplessly as the dog's condition continued to deteriorate, its once alert eyes now barely open, flickering with the barest signs of life. The fear of losing the dog gripped him. The thought of it dying after valiantly protecting the owlets was unbearable. Jeremy paced the room, his mind racing for a solution. He knew the animal rescue wouldn't arrive in time. The storm had made sure of that. The clock was ticking, each passing second a reminder of how critical the situation had become. He grabbed his phone, his hands shaking, and called his friend, the local vet. "You have to help me, please," Jeremy pleaded. The vet, recognizing the gravity of the situation, responded immediately. "Bring the dog in, Jeremy. I'll get everything ready," he replied. Determined, Jeremy wrapped the dog once more, careful to shield its fragile body from the biting cold. He carried it to his truck, each step feeling heavy as the wind howled around him, snowflakes stinging his face. Jeremy moved quickly, gathering the owlets and wrapping the dog tightly in the blanket, its fragile body still trembling. Jeremy rushed outside, battling the fierce wind as he placed them in his car, gently securing them on the passenger seat. The storm was unrelenting, the wind whipping snow against the windshield in thick sheets. He knew driving in this weather was dangerous. Icy roads and poor visibility made every turn treacherous, but the urgency in his chest outweighed the risk. He couldn't let the dog die, not after all it had done. The journey felt like a delicate balancing act. Jeremy wanted to race to the vet as fast as he could, but the slick roads forced him to move with caution. He kept glancing at the dog, whose breaths were shallow and irregular, the ticking clock of its condition driving Jeremy forward. He navigated the winding roads, the visibility barely a few feet ahead. Each time the car slid, even slightly, Jeremy's heart pounded harder. Finally, the faint glow of the vet's office appeared through the blizzard. Jeremy exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Pulling into the parking lot, he skidded to a stop and quickly carried the dog inside. The vet, true to his word, was ready and waiting. The vet immediately took the dog into the back, leaving Jeremy in the waiting area with the owlets tucked securely in their blanket. Hours passed, each minute stretching as Jeremy waited for any news. When the vet finally emerged, his face softened into a reassuring smile. "Jeremy, you did something incredible," he said, his voice calm yet filled with respect. "If you hadn't brought the dog in when you did, it wouldn't have made it. Thankfully, it's stable now." Relief washed over Jeremy, his shoulders sagging as the tension released. He told the vet about how the dog had protected the owlets, the brave act that had driven him to risk so much. The vet nodded and checked on the owlets, who seemed to be recovering well from their ordeal. As Jeremy looked out the window, he noticed the storm had finally abated. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a quiet, still blanket over the world outside. The streets glistened under the streetlights, the chaos of the storm replaced by a serene calm. Exhausted from the night's ordeal, Jeremy finally headed home. The warmth of his bed, which he had longed for since the evening, now offered a respite from the cold and the worry that had gripped him. He drifted off, sleep overcoming him as soon as he hit the pillow. When Jeremy awoke the next morning, his first thought was of the dog and the owlets. He dressed quickly, eager to see how they were faring. The roads, though still blanketed in snow, were much safer now, the storm's fury now a distant memory. Arriving at the vet's office, Jeremy's heart lifted when he saw the dog awake, its eyes brighter than the night before. As soon as the dog spotted Jeremy, its tail wagged weakly but enthusiastically, and it pushed itself up, padding over to him. Jeremy knelt down, gently stroking the dog's head as it leaned into him, a soft whimper escaping its lips. The dog licked his hand, its gratitude and affection palpable. Jeremy's eyes misted as he realized how the dog had almost sacrificed its life for the owlets. The vet joined Jeremy, and together they made arrangements for the owlets to be transported to a wildlife sanctuary. The vet assured Jeremy that the sanctuary would provide the care they needed to thrive and eventually return to the wild. Over the following days, Jeremy visited the vet's office regularly, checking on the dog as it slowly regained its strength. Each visit, the dog greeted Jeremy with renewed energy, and they spent time together. Jeremy's presence a constant comfort to the recovering animal. The bond between Jeremy and the dog deepened with each passing day. Jeremy, once hesitant to open his heart again, felt it swell with a renewed sense of purpose and connection. The dog's bravery and gentle nature had tugged at the old man's heartstrings. As the dog recovered and got ready to be discharged, Jeremy knew he couldn't part with it. He spoke with the vet, expressing his desire to adopt the dog, and the vet wholeheartedly supported his decision. Jeremy signed the adoption papers, feeling a joy he hadn't known in years. Jeremy named the dog Scout, a tribute to its vigilant spirit and the courage it had shown. Scout settled into Jeremy's home as if it had always belonged there, its presence filling the previously empty house with warmth and companionship. Jeremy and Scout quickly became inseparable. Jeremy felt a sense of renewal, a new chapter unfolding. The storm that had once seemed so daunting had, in the end, brought him the greatest gift: a loyal friend and a companion for him.